All right, welcome back. Welcome to Easy Economics. We were solving October-November 2023, paper 5 IGCSE 0455, variant 13, beginning from MCQ number 16. All right, MCQ number 16. Now, it shows you the table, and the table is giving values for costs and output. The table shows the costs incurred by a firm producing computers. What other fixed costs if 3,000 computers are produced? Now, if you look at the table, they have given you the output levels. They're beginning from 0 and they are exceeding till 3,000. And they've given you the total cost as well. Now, we all know the total cost is a sum of variable and fixed cost. Initially, when the output level was 0, still you can see some amount of cost. And that cost is what? Exactly, that cost is fixed cost. We all know that fixed cost is a cost that needs to be paid even when the level of output is 0. And it will remain the same in spite of the fact that the level of output increases. Now they're asking what are the fixed costs if 3,000 computers are produced? So the fixed cost is eventually going to remain the same, right? It will not rise with the level of output. So the correct answer to MCQ number 16 has to be $20,000, which is option A. So for 16, it needs to be A. All right, number 17. Number 17 says a government increases its revenue by higher direct taxation of both personal incomes and company profits. What is most likely to be the reason for this increase? Now, we all know that the government imposes taxes, and in this case, it has imposed taxes to generate higher revenues, and it has imposed taxes on individual incomes and as well as on company or corporate profits. Now, they're saying what could be the reason behind the government's taking this action? A says to control spending on specific consumer goods. Now, it can't be option A. Why? Because if the government wanted to curtail the spending of consumers on specific consumer goods, it would have gone with the option of imposing indirect taxes and not direct taxes. So you can chop A off. B says to encourage business investment. Had the government wanted to increase the businesses to go for more amounts of investing in the business, encouraging business for repatriation of profits, so then it would not have been charging higher taxation levels on their profits, because imposing higher taxation on profits is actually hampering their business's ability to increase the production level or increase the investment level. So B is against the intention. So B need to be chopped off. C says to provide for public and merit goods. Yes, that's the correct answer. Because why? Because imposing direct taxes is one way that the government intends to raise revenue in order for its provision of public and merit goods, right? Why? Because we all know that merit goods were what? Goods which government considers that consumers will not appreciate how beneficial they are. And if left to the market forces, they are always going to be underconsumed, right? Example were healthcare and education. And what about public goods? Who will recall for me what public goods were? Yes, a product which is non-rival and non-excludable, correct? And it needs to be financed by taxation, right? So now C is the correct answer. Why can't it be D? To reduce pollution from industrial production, it cannot be D, because if the government wanted to reduce pollution from industrial production, then it would not have been charging higher direct taxation from individuals, from personal incomes. It would only have taken this from out of company profits, right? Or maybe imposing a tax on companies only, not on individuals. That is why you will eliminate D. So for 17, it has to be C. All right, now let's look at MCQ number 18. MCQ number 18 says increasing income tax in a country gives all individuals an initial tax-free income allowance. Any income above this allowance is taxed at increasing rates as the incomes of individuals rise. So now what is happening? They are saying that initially there was a tax-free band given to all individuals across the board. Now beyond this band, the incomes are going to be charged at increasing rates, which means that as your income levels rise, so a higher percentage of your income or wealth will be charged with that percentage, right? Now they're saying with change to this income tax will be regressive. Now if they want to keep it entirely opposite, now if they want to swap it with being regressive in nature, which means that a larger proportion of tax will be charged from whom? Lower incomes of people. Now they wanted to make it to be regressive in nature. Regressive in nature means that you want the burden of tax to fall more on lower income levels, right? Entirely opposite to the progressive in nature. You want the tax burden to fall more on lower income level people. So now they're saying which action of government will be regressive. A says decreasing the lowest rate of tax. If you are decreasing the lowest rate of tax, so it won't be regressive in nature, right? D says increasing the top rate of tax. Again, increasing the top rate of tax will not be regressive, it will be progressive in nature. All right. If you want it to be regressive in nature, this means it needs to fall more on lower income levels of people. And it would only fall low on lower, the burden will fall more on lower level of income people if you will decrease the tax-free income allowance. Why? Because decreasing the tax-free income allowance will do what? Because those who are earning lower level of income will be relying more heavily on this tax-free allowance, right? Why? Because they need to cover the basic necessities. So if you are reducing the tax-free income allowance, so the burden will be falling more on them, right? Rather than on higher income individuals. So the gap is going to widen, right? The gap is going to widen between the rich and the poor. So decreasing the tax-free income allowance will be regressive in nature. C is entirely opposite to this situation. So it has to be B. All right. Number 19. A government lowers the rate of interest. Now, if the government is reducing the interest rate level, what happens? Who is most likely to be disadvantaged by this policy? Now, who will be the losers in this case if the government is reducing the interest rate? House buyers, manufacturers, retailers, or savers. House buyers will be at a benefit. They will be able to achieve house loans at subsidized rates, at lower levels of rate. Manufacturers will again be at a benefit. Why? Because they will be able to again achieve loans on favorable terms, discounted rates. Retailers again, they can expand their production level if the interest rates are low. It will be the savers. Why? Because they will be getting less on their savings, right? They will be getting lesser returns on their savings. So 19 has to be D. All right, let's look at number 20. Number 20 says, what is a supply side measure? Now we all know supply side policy measures are what? Supply side policy measures are which aim to increase the aggregate supply, which aim to boost aggregate supply. Now, A says a tariff on imported goods, B says an increase in indirect taxes, C says a contractionary monetary policy, and D says the removal of barriers to entry to a market. Now, if you look at A, B, and C, both are against increasing the aggregate supply in the economy. Why? Because when you're importing tariffs on imported goods, so then again you are restricting the aggregate supply. When you're imposing indirect taxes, again you are decreasing the money supply or increasing the interest rate, which is contractionary monetary policy. Again, you are hampering the aggregate supply. It's D when you're removing the barriers, when you're allowing for more trade, when you are allowing for more producers to enter into the market, when you are allowing for more levels of production in the economy. Yes, you are allowing for boosting aggregate supply. So that's a supply side policy measure. So the correct answer for MCQ number 20 has to be D. All right, let's look at 21. 21 says, what is the most likely consequence of economic growth? So they're saying, what would be the result of higher levels of economic growth? The most likely consequence. More equal income distribution, not necessarily. If there is economic growth in the economy, it doesn't necessarily mean that there will be equitable income distribution. The disparity might increase. The richer might get rich and the poorer might get poor. So you never know. Not necessarily that it has to be equitable distribution of income. So you'll chop A off. B says more use of resources. Yes, that's the correct answer. Why? Because we all know that economic growth occurs when productive potential in the economy increases, right? So this means you are making use of your resources more. So for 21, it has to be B. But let's look at why it can't be the remaining two options. Reduced imports. Not necessarily. Import levels can also rise if there is economic growth. Uh, Not necessarily. D says reduce tax revenue. Again, not necessarily. They're saying what would be the most likely consequence of economic growth? Yes, more use of resources. Economic growth means increase in the productive potential of the economy. So more use of resources, right? So 21 has to be B. All right. Let's move to MCQ number 22. 22 says in high income economies, cereal farming is highly productive, but few workers are employed. What could have caused this employment situation? Now, what they are saying is that in spite of the fact that cereal farming is highly productive, which means that the output level is being maximized and using minimum level of input, but still we are using less workers. Now, they're saying what could have caused this employment situation, that the troublesome situation or the point of thinking at the moment which they are wanting you to reflect upon is they are saying why are fewer workers employed in spite of the fact that the productivity is high. What could have caused this? A fall in world demand for cereals. If there would have been a fall in world demand for cereals, then it wouldn't have been beneficial for farms to grow for cereals. B says a lack of capital equipment. C says an increased mechanization of agriculture, and D says large scale migration from rural areas. Why are few workers being employed? See, they're asking you, the hint is there in the question is employment situation. So it has something to do with the labor. So this means that yes, the productivity level is rising. They're asking you to think upon the employment situation. This means that labor is being substituted with capital. Agriculture is now what? Agriculture is now more of capital intensive, right? So it has to be C. Agriculture is more mechanized, right? Replaced by more of capital intensive and not labor intensive in nature. So 22 has to be C. See, the hint is there in the question. You just need to reread it and you will get the answer. The hint was the employment situation in this case. This was the key term. 23. 23 says, who is most likely to benefit during a period of inflation? Now, inflation is there. Now they're saying, who is the benefiter? A says creditors, those who lend. B says debtors, those who borrow. C says fixed income earners. D says holders of cash. Now, holders of cash are going to suffer because it would have been beneficial for them to have been invested their money somewhere else, because what is happening in period of inflation? The real value of money is falling. The purchasing power of money is falling. So holders of cash will be at a loss. Similarly, for fixed income earners, why? Because their income level is fixed and it's not rising with the level of inflation. So the purchasing power of money is going to fall. Their income levels is going to buy what? Fewer basket of goods. So it cannot be C. Similarly, A, lenders would also be at a loss, because now if whatever money they are going to get back out of their loans, it would be able to buy them lesser amount of goods and services, right? The real value of money is falling, right? It has to be B. Yes, that's the correct answer. Why? Because now the real value of money is falling. So the money is now losing its purchasing power. So if the borrowers had been borrowing money now, they would have been at a loss, because they would have then need to be able to borrow more of it, right? So they are better off because they borrowed it back when the inflation level was not this high as it is now, right? So 23 has to be B. All right, number 24. Number 24 says, the table shows some economic indicators, all right, which increase in the first indicator is most likely to lead to an increase in the second indicator. Now, they're saying the first indicator has to rise, and due to the rise of the first part of the table, the first part of the elements in the table, there would be a rise in the second part of the elements present in the table. Now, let's see. A says budget surplus will lead to consumer saving. Now, what is budget surplus? Budget surplus is what? When government revenues exceed government expenditure. So government revenues exceed government expenditure means what? When government earning money by way of taxation is higher relative to the amount government is spending on, let's say, infrastructure or the provision of public or merit goods. It would lead to consumer saving. No, because the consumer would have been spending on, let's say, goods and services. That is why the government is able to earn more of taxation. So consumer spending would have been increasing and not saving, right? Consumer spending would have been increasing. That is why the government would have been earning more by way of indirect taxes and by way of direct taxes because the income levels are rising, right? So it has to be, it cannot be A. We need to eliminate A. Now B says what? Consumer spending is increasing. That is why unemployment is increasing. No, consumer spending, if consumer spending is increasing, so the unemployment level should have been falling. Why? Because a rise in consumer spending would have been stimulating aggregate demand. And when aggregate demand increases, what happens? The employment level rises, right? Because the production level rises, right? So you can eliminate B. C says if inflation level is increasing, so the trade surplus is increasing. Not necessarily. If the inflation level is increasing, it would be a deficit. All right. Why? Because in the inflation level is increasing, so exports would have been expensive and imports would have been relatively cheaper. So it would have been a deficit. You would have been exporting less and importing more in that case. Your exports would have lost their export competitiveness. So you can eliminate C. Yes, it has to be D. Why? Because higher productivity levels, when you are producing more output per unit of input, it will lead to higher standard of living. The quality of living will rise, right? Living standards will increase. So for 24, it has to be D. So by elimination also and by logic also, I have shown you that for the correct answer for 24 has to be D. Now 25, which combination would be most likely to increase the population of a country? Now they're saying they want to increase the population of a country. Now birth rates, what should happen to birth rates if the population has to increase? Birth rate has to rise. So you can chop C and D because they're saying low birth rates. What about death rates? If you want population to increase, death rate should what? Death rate should fall. Death rate should be low. So you can chop A because in A they are saying what? In A they are saying death rates have to be high. We are left with only B. Let's look at the third part of the table. The third part of the table says net immigration has to be positive. Yes, what is net immigration? When people coming into your country are relatively higher than people leaving your country, right? So the inflow of the people is higher relative to the outflow of the people. That is when net immigration is positive. So for 25, it has to be B. Again, through logic and by elimination, I've shown you why for 25, it has to be B. All right, let's move to 26. 26 says, which economic consequence is most likely to result from an increasing proportion of the population being over the age of 65? Now, what is happening? You have got an elderly population rising. The proportion of dependent population is rising. 65 years and above means the elderly population is more. Now, they're saying what would be the economic consequence of this situation? Now, what is likely to happen? Government transfer payments will increase. Exactly. Why? Because the government would need to pay more in pensions, right? Or let's say health benefits. All right. 25 says more facilities will be needed to retrain workers. No. Beyond 65, that's not the working age. Will job be off. C says the total savings in the economy increase. No, the people who are beyond the 65 years age, they are living on their savings. So savings cannot increase. There will be a rise in the economic growth rate. No, they are not part of the labor force. So it has to be A under all circumstances. Again, by reasoning and by elimination, for 26, it has to be A. 27, what is most likely to encourage international specialization? Now, what will encourage the countries to go for specializing? Specializing again means when you are increasing the level of production in the production of those goods in which the company has a comparative advantage over other countries. So what would promote countries to do for it? Similarities in climate in different countries? No, climate has nothing to do with that. The ability to produce products more cheaply than the other countries? Yes, that's the reason why, because you are at a benefit. You will be producing those goods and services at a comparatively lesser cost. So your production cost will be lower. And this way you will be increasing the efficiency and you will be better at producing those goods and services. It will give you a competitive edge. It will give you a comparative advantage. If there are high international transport costs, that will be a discouraging you. Discovery oil and oil that had no oil before, that is not specializing. Specializing is because you will be providing it more cheaply. Your average cost of production will be relatively lower than the other countries. So 27 has to be B. This way you will pass it on to the consumers in the form of higher prices, right? So you can compete. All right, 28. 28 says country X establish free trade agreements with other nations. What would be the intended benefit of such agreements to country X? Now, why would a country X go for establishing free trade agreement with other nations? What would be the incentive behind it? What benefit it tries to reap? Increase labor shortages? No. If the government want to have labor shortages, it is not a reason. It's not a benefit. B says increase tariff revenue. It's free trade. It's not a question of tariff. You're promoting trade. You're not discouraging trade. C says more efficient allocation of resources. Yes, that's the correct answer. D says protection from low wage competition. No, it has to be C. Why? Because again, you are allowing promoting more trade, and again, you are trying to produce goods and services in which you have a comparative advantage. You are promoting trade, you are promoting economic activity. So you would want to produce more goods and services in which you have a comparative advantage. And this way you can increase your efficiency, allowing you to use your resources more efficiently, right? So 28 has to be C. All right, 29. A country's foreign exchange rate appreciates significantly. Which group in the country is will directly benefit from this change? Now, what is happening? That there is a rise in your country's exchange rate, which means what? That this will raise the price of your exports and it will lower the price of imports, right? So the domestic currency will be buying more of foreign currency, right? So now they're saying which group in the country will directly benefit from this change? Directly benefit from what change? From the appreciation of the currency. A says a government department which only buys locally made goods. It's a government department and it's only concerned with the domestic production of goods. So it's nothing to do with international trade. So appreciation of the currency will not be a question for him. He'll chop A off. D. D says workers in local companies that sell in foreign countries. C says workers in local companies that compete with foreign firms. So in both C and D, we are talking about workers. We are not talking about the companies. So workers are not going to benefit. They're saying which group will directly benefit from this change. So workers are not going to be benefiting directly. Yes, workers will be benefiting indirectly because the companies in which they are working, they would be finding it beneficial. Their companies are going to be at a benefit because their exports will be competitive, right? But workers, they're asking who will benefit directly from this change. So it has to be B. Why? Because in B, they are saying retailers who get all their supplies from foreign producers. So it's the retailers who's benefiting. So what is happening? The retailers, since your domestic currency is rising in value, so the retailer will be having a chance to benefit from this situation, right? Because a rise in your domestic currency will be lowering the price of imports for you, right? All right. So for 29, it has to be B. Number 30. All right, that's the last MCQ. What is measured in the secondary income balance in a country's current account of the balance of payment? Now, we all know there are 4 components in the current account BOP, right? The balance of trade in goods, the balance of trade in services, and secondary income and primary income. Now, let's look at the options. B says net export of goods and services. Net export of goods and services is talking about what? Balance on trade in goods and services. So you can chop B off because we want what? What is measured in the secondary income balance. C says net foreign investment flows and D says net inflow of income from factors of production abroad. Both C and D are part of primary income. So we are left with option A. A says net contributions to international and regional organizations. That's exactly what is a part of secondary income balance. So 30 has to be A. Why? Because what was secondary income? What was secondary income? Secondary income includes what? Secondary income includes transfers of money, goods or services sent out of the country or which comes into the country, not in return for anything else. Remember? What did it include? It included what? Gifts, charitable donations, right? Workers' remittances. Remember? And net foreign investment flows and net inflow of income from factors of production are what? They are all part of primary income, right? All right. So this brings us to the end of the paper. I hope you've all understood and you all like what we did today. Let me know through your comments and suggestions which papers do you all want me to continue with. You can reach me out at the number provided in the description. Feel free for any queries or suggestions. Take care. Happy learning. See you. Stay tuned.